All right, let's go ahead and get started while we have some more folks coming in. Again, welcome everyone to Flame Week and to our online webinar for today. For those of you that have stuck it through with us for the past two webinars and past 2 days, we're really excited to have you on again. Thank you for being our seasoned Flame Week webinar participant. We look forward to sharing a really great presentation with you today. Again, my name, for those of you that have not been with us so far this week, my name is Carrie McCullen, and I am the Forest Supervisor at Turnbull Creek Educational State Forest. That is our education state forest that's in the coastal region of North Carolina, down in Elizabethtown in Bladen County. And we decided to put on this special Flame Week. It's called Fire Learning and Mitigation Education Week, because there's a lot of questions surrounding wildfires and prescribed burning. We started off the week learning about planning and executing a prescribed burn. Yesterday, we went through some of the law enforcement information and rules and regulations for not only wildfires, but also for prescribed burning, what you can and can't do in the state. And that was a really good bit of information that we were provided by our law enforcement agent. Today, we're switching gears a little bit and talking mostly about weather. But before we get started, for those that are maybe new to Zoom, we'll go ahead and go through a little bit of housekeeping. So today we are going to be listening in on our speakers. So we want to make sure that all of our participants are muted. You should have a mute feature right above your microphone or on your microphone. And then on the bottom left, also stop video, making sure that both of those are stopped. In the middle of the screen on the bottom, we have our chat button. That's where we'll be taking all of our questions at the end for our speakers. So if you have a question that you would like to ask our two presenters today, feel free to put that into the chat. And here's how we do that. So you click the button, our chat box will open up, and then we'll have a section at the bottom where you can type a message in. Be sure that the to section will have everyone listed in blue. That makes sure that we can see your post. Your question will populate up in the meeting chat. For instance, this gentleman here says, "Where can I get a burning permit?" And we'll be able to see that and answer it later on. Also, today we have some interchanging of videos and presentations. Your view may be obstructed by other boxes and speakers and things. So if you need to make adjustment, in the top right-hand corner is the view button. You can press that and zoom in out as needed. And then finally, at the end of our presentation today, of course, hit the red end button on the far bottom right-hand corner, and we'll conclude for the day. All right, so thank you so much again for joining us today. We'll go ahead and get started. Today's objectives we'll have in today's webinar are learning about the relationship between fire and weather, two very dynamic and very important things. We're very lucky at Turnbull Creek Educational State Forest to be a host site for a RAW station, which means Remote Automatic Weather Station. And we can see hourly weather readouts right from the forest. This helps us mostly for our prescribed burning efforts here on the forest, but it also gives key information for our local Forest Service district's fire danger readings during wildfire season, which are very important. On today's webinar, we'll first hear about a past wildfire in North Carolina where weather played a critical role. Then we'll have two presentations, one explaining how weather impacts fire, and then the second on how we can model and make predictions based on our understanding of how weather and fire interact. And then lastly, we'll finish with questions from our speakers. Okay, so to start off, we're going to give a quick video from Hagan Blake, the Pender County Ranger. In the video, we'll hear about a significant wildfire that ignited in Pender County several years back, and how luckily weather acted in favor of those fighting the fire. Again, you may have to raise your speaker volume for this one, so go ahead and do so now if needed, and let's take a listen.
Hi, my name is Hagan Blake. I'm employee with the North Carolina Forest Service District 8 in Pender County. Weather plays an extremely important role in firefighter safety, along with our tactics of how we implement a routine fire. One of the most memorable fires that impacted me as a supervisor in Pender County was the Juniper Road fire in 2011. It is located in Holly Shelter, game lands, which is the only designated extreme forest fire danger area in the state of North Carolina. What we had that day was, it was summertime in June. June 18th, 2011 is when the actual thunderstorm came in. The fire was caused by a lightning strike. Was discovered on June 19th. We contained the fire at 116 acres. The next day, the 20th, is when the fire escaped. We were already in a drought situation. Was not your typical summertime weather patterns going on. We had high winds, low relative humidity. Again, we were already in a drought. Kind of one of them days that the hair on the back of your neck stands up. The fire kept spotting our lines, and then it made a significant run to the Hampstead community. At that time, I got on the phone with our emergency management coordinator, and I was like, look, I need some help. We got urban interface, structure protection. This fire was going to Hampstead. And luckily, we contacted the weather service, and they were like, hey, the winds are going to shift out of the north. And they did. And what happened there, the fire basically turned, stopped its run from going to Hampstead, and that saved tremendous amount of structures. The change in the wind direction changed our firefighting tactics from structure protection, which we had roughly 40 fire trucks parked at the Lowe's in Surf City waiting to be deployed to structures, to basically returning them resources back home, freeing them up to the fire coming back in, staying in Holly Shelter. And then our tactic went to stopping the forward progress of the fire by doing a burnout operation the next day, which again, doing a burnout operation would key on weather. If we could do the burnout safely and for firefighter safety. Knowing that the weather service give us a heads up that the fire was going to shift to the north, we were able to let the homeowners in Hampstead know, take a little burden off of them, that yes, their property is safe now. Then we could focus back to fighting the fire in the Holly Shelter game land. We were able to keep the fire. It burnt almost a little over 31,000 acres, but we were able to keep it contained into the natural area of Holly Shelter game land. Knowing the weather forecast, knowing the lookouts of fire behavior, that's why we as rangers go through such rigorous training to be able to see, recognize, and react to the changing weather, to help firefighter safety and for public safety.
So our North Carolina Forest Service Rangers, as you can hear, rely heavily on data gathered and information relayed to us from the National Weather Service. Weather, as you can tell, is an integral consideration when fighting a wildfire, as I mentioned earlier, especially with safety of our firefighters, but also safety of homeowners to which the fire may be potentially heading toward. It helps us to make decisions, what kind of personnel we need on fires, what kind of equipment we'll need to allocate to the firefighting efforts. And we're very fortunate in the southeastern area of North Carolina to have a National Weather Service outpost in Wilmington. Terry Lebo, who's on the call today, is the lead meteorologist with the National Weather Service Wilmington Forecast Office. He also happens to be an IMET or incident meteorologist and has traveled all over working on wildfire incidents, even to Australia. So before Terry takes the stage, I want to remind our viewers today that the information referenced in Flame Week webinar series is specific to practices in North Carolina and for prescribed burning and wildfire mitigation within the state. We'll be taking questions from the chat after these presentations, so feel free to send them as we go. And thanks for joining us today, Terry.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get my presentation going. So I'll just go ahead, and what I was going to do is I'm going to go just do a quick kind of coverage of what we have going on right now as far as kind of the conditions we have out there. what we're going to see going into the spring, and then I'm going to get into a little bit of both kind of how weather impacts wildfire, and then also some stuff for any landowners that want to be doing controlled burning type stuff, things that they can look for, ways they can use the products that we put out to kind of help make their activities successful. So this is our rainfall departure from normal, and this is in inches. This is a mix of radar estimated and then also using surface observations. As was mentioned before, we have the rawest station up in Turnbull Creek. We have many of them across the state of North Carolina. So anyway, the two images we have here are the rainfall departure from normal. Again, this is in inches. And the image on the top left, that is from October 1st to February 6th. The reason October 1st is listed is because that's what meteorologists use as a water year. I don't know why they decided on October 1st, but that's what they did. So that's rainfall departure from normal since October 1st. And then in the last 90 days, so that's the last 90 days prior to February 6th, because that's the radar the radar estimations update every day in the morning. So that was the latest one that I could grab last night. But you can see most of our forecast area that we worry about is in a drought. Now, I didn't zoom out to the state, but the eastern half of the state is pretty much in a drought. If you get out to the mountains, they've been having good rainfall, but on the eastern side of the state, we're definitely in a drought, and it's been a prolonged drought. It's not as a severe a drought as it was back in when the Juniper Road 1 fire happened. We had been in a pretty good drought for an extended period of time, but we have been in a drought that is prolonged, and that'll do a couple things. That'll help dry out the soil, so there's less moisture for plants and trees as they go into green up, which will happen, in the next couple weeks to the next month or so, depending on where you are in the state. It also stresses a lot of the live plants, and then of course it helps dry out all the dead fuels. So that will make fuels more susceptible to weather conditions that are going to be adverse. So again, looking across the area, anywhere from 4 inches to 8 or even potentially 12 inches below normal since October 1st. We have had rain more recently, although it's been quick shots and not great amounts as much as we would like to see. But so it's been helpful, but it's kind of just been keeping pace with the drought versus making a dent in the drought, if that makes some sense. So here's the current drought condition, the monitor from across the country, and you can see the eastern third of North Carolina is pretty much drought persists. This was as of February 1st. And then as we kind of look into spring and the summer, I'm going to talk about a little bit of the conditions we're going to start to see. First, this is the El Nino, La Nina outlook, and that has to do with the water temperatures and the sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean. But what that does is that affects the circulation across the globe. And so that has an impact on us locally. I know everybody hears about El Nino when the West Coast is getting a lot of rain and stuff, but it affects us as well. And right now we're in La Nina, which means the water temperature is cooler. The forecast is for La Nina to transition to neutral and possibly El Nino by the end of the summer. I have more confidence this year that it'll happen than last year, but I would caution that last year at this time, all of the guidance was showing the conditions swinging from La Nina to neutral. The graph looked very similar to what it looks right now, and it never happened. It stayed La Nina throughout the entire year. So that's one reason we've kind of been getting less rainfall. We've been having the warm temperatures and then the quick cold shots. That's typical of a La Nina winter in the southeast. If we go more toward neutral, I would expect to see kind of what's typical for the southeast in the summer. So we'll be getting more thunderstorm coverage. You'll be getting more thunderstorm rain. So that would help to mitigate any drought conditions that we have as we get later into this late spring and into summer. And then here's just the drought outlook through April, and you can see they really didn't make a whole lot of change as far as North Carolina is concerned, with the drought still persisting in the eastern third or so of the state. And then this is just the predictive services wildland fire potential. So this is for February. Right now we're in the normal potential, but you'll see as we get into March, we start to get above normal wildland fire potential. And then as we get into April, that may start to drop off. I think that's going to depend on how quickly we start to see the transition from La Nina to neutral, and we start to see more rainfall, more prolonged events. The thing is with a global circulation and the effect that the La Nina El Nino has, it's not just going to be a light switch that flips. It's going to be like if you turn off a ceiling fan and the ceiling fan takes a little bit of time to wind down. So just imagine like you were switching the direction on your ceiling fan. Well, you don't want to just switch it while it's running. You got to turn it off, let it come down to a stop, and then you would switch it and then turn it back on. So that's kind of how it works with the global circulation. So, in summary, for our area, most of eastern North Carolina, La Nina is forecast to transition to neutral for the spring and the summer. That would Until that happens, we can expect overall warmer and drier conditions for the end of winter and the spring. We will occasionally get the brief shots of cold air. And what that can do is if we do get temperatures that are below freezing, you can get some frost curing. So that'll pull moisture out of your dead fuels. And then as it warms up in the day and we get the drier air coming in that typically comes with those cold air masses, that'll help dry the fuels out a little bit quicker. The pattern is conducive to faster moving cold fronts that have less precipitation with them. And a lot of times it's very dry and very breezy behind those fronts. Looking just at the conditions we have, rainfall is anywhere from 4 to 8 inches below normal, and that's 25 to 50% of normal. So less than half of our normal rainfall since October 1st. The recent rains have been helping keep the deficit from getting worse, but they haven't been helping. Soil moisture right now is running 3 to 4 inches below normal, and so that's just going to mean your duff is going to be dried out more. So all the stuff that's on the ground, the dead leaves, everything, that's just drier. There's less moisture for the plants as they go into green up, so that stresses the plants and makes them more susceptible to burn. And then just a kind of a note that neutral years are almost as active as La Nina years with respect to tropical storms and hurricanes. So it could be, another hurricane year, so to speak. So that's kind of my summary for the conditions we have right now. Now I'm going to transition into a little bit of the next slides I have are more for prescribed burning and landowners that want to burn, but I'm also going to do a little bit of a quick talk here just about kind of the things that I look at when I go to a wildfire. And you can get all this information off of our webpage. And the link that I'm going to show you, even if you're outside of the Wilmington, North Carolina Weather Service forecast area, this link will work no matter where you are in the country. So if you happen to be in Morehead City's area or Raleigh's area, or you decide you're moving out west and you want to go live out there and burn, this will work out there too. So we'll just go to our webpage, and then I'll go back here, and when you click on that drop down menu, you'll see the fire weather pop up. If you click on that fire weather, it'll bring you to this page, and the fire weather dashboard is the most important thing on that page in my eyes. And when you click on that, it brings you to this map, and I have the map zoomed in onto Turnbull Creek. You can see it's pulling up Elizabethtown, but it's just referencing the closest city to Turnbull Creek. And then it brings up this table, and if you scroll down, you'll see this table, and we have this table here that gives you all this great information. Now, when I'm at a wildfire, there are several things that I'm considering and that the teams are going to be worried about, and the people managing the fire. Obviously, RH, wind direction. They're going to be worried about cloud cover, because if you start getting more cloud cover, a couple things happen. Your temperatures drop, your RH comes up, but the fuel temperatures also drop, and so the fire is going to spread slower at a slower rate, which can be good or bad. If they're trying to do a burnout to take fuel away from the fire before it gets somewhere, they're going to want better conditions to burn than if it's going to be cloudy and if it's going to be cool. Obviously, wind direction, and then another thing that's a big concern are going to be sea breezes or outflow from thunderstorms. So all of those things are kind of some of the things that I'm watching when I go to a wildfire. And if we get a wildfire locally, like when we had Juniper Road 2 last year, All our office was working with North Carolina Forest Service to help manage that. I was on the phone multiple times with the guys and the gals managing the fire, giving them information. A lot of them have my home number, so they were calling me, and I was chatting with them about stuff. So we have the office here in Wilmington, and I know up in Morehead City too, has a great relationship with the North Carolina Forest Service. So that's really helpful for both entities. As far as what you're going to be looking for, if you want to do some burning on your, on your property, or you're, looking to burn some stuff, the forecast is going to be helpful. But what you really want to look at is the stability forecast, and I have that circled in red. There's a lot of terms in there, a lot of abbreviations, but on the next slide, I'm going to kind of break into that a little bit. The main thing you want to look for is if you see a lot of red, so you can see those reds earlier on in the day and then later in the afternoon or later in the evening, that's conditions that are not going to be good for burning. So that means the smoke's going to hang around. You're going to smoke out neighbors or a highway that's near you and potentially cause some issues. So those are going to be the things that you're going to be looking for if you want to do some local burning. And again, so here I took the fire weather stability table and I kind of zoomed in on it and kind of gave a little bit of a breakdown of what these things mean. Mixing height is basically how high the smoke's going to rise. So if you have 3,000 foot mixing height, the smoke's going to go up about 3,000 feet. That's good. If your mixing height's 300 feet, it's not going to go up very far. And so you're going to end up with smoke everywhere. If ventilation rate, that's basically how fast the smoke is going to move off. So if the smoke's moving away at a quicker rate, that's good. It's going to disperse. You're not going to have issues. Again, if you start to see it drop down into those red values, that means the smoke's going to hang around and you could potentially smoke yourself out, your neighbors, a highway, again, school. The Haynes index is just a combination of how dry and how unstable the atmosphere is. It can indicate the potential for extreme wildfire growth, but just because you have a high Haynes index doesn't mean that it's going to be a day where the fire grows. It's just a potential indicator. And that's a scale of 1 to 6, 1 being the lowest, actually 2 to 6, I apologize. 2 to 6, 2 being the lowest and 6 being the highest. LAL is the lightning activity level, and that just indicates the potential for lightning and for dry lightning. And that scale is 1 to 6. 1 means no lightning. 6 means lots of dry lightning. We rarely get dry lightning around here. I don't think I've ever seen it in the Southeast, but I'm never going to say never because weather will always do strange things. And then there's the three main stability parameters on the bottom: the low visibility occurrence risk index, Turner stability, and atmospheric dispersion index. They all discuss stability. And in my next slide, I actually break them down a little bit better. Actually, I apologize. Let me go back. This one, I give the definitions quick, and then I have the charts. So the LVORI is basically 0 to 10. That indicates the risk for super fog, which is a mix of fog and smoke. When you burn, you get lots of particulates that are larger than typical fog particles. So you end up with what they call super fog. It is really dense. I mean, I've seen super fog where I couldn't see. I was sitting in my vehicle and I couldn't see halfway to the hood of the car. So it can get very dense, and that can be an issue on highways. Turner stability, that's just the atmospheric stability. That takes into account wind speed and solar radiation. And then ADI is just the how quickly the atmosphere can move pollutants away from the source. And so then I have a little bit of a table here that just kind of breaks down the different categories for the LVORI and for the dispersion index. That's actually the ADI. They just call it dispersion index, but it is the atmospheric dispersion index. So the ADI that I spoke about earlier. And then, so if you do want to do some control burning and you're a landowner, these are kind of the things you want to look for when you're using that chart. You'd like to see mixing height over 3,000 feet and transport winds over 10 mile per hour. You want your RH about 35%. Lower than that, it can become problematic as far as controlling. And then higher than that, you're probably not going to burn a whole lot. Again, it will depend on the fuel type and on your winds, so a little bit, but if your surface wind forecast is under 10 mile per hour, that's good. If the RH is higher, then a little bit higher surface wind is not a bad thing, but you don't want to be burning on a day when you've got 30 mile per hour wind gusts. I say that, but I know people that do it. So it's kind of one of those things where you'd think it would make sense not to do it, but I guess people just don't always consider that. You're looking for good overnight humidity recovery, so 60% or higher, and no strong winds overnight, because if you have strong winds overnight, you're probably not going to be drying out too much overnight. You'll have good mixing. And then if you have any heat laying around or any embers, that can get thrown out and that can start, a new start somewhere. Consider your Elvori, ADI, and Turner stability conditions. You're going to want the good atmospheric dispersion. So like I said, you don't smoke out neighbors or a highway or a school or a hospital or whatever. And if you see lots of red on that table, I would consider a different day. And that's pretty much all I've got for this. Again, I apologize that the PowerPoint wasn't working with us, but made the best of what we had.
Yep, that's what we've got to do. Always adapt and improvise, right, Terry?
Yep.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning also, I failed to do that earlier with that Juniper Road 1 fire. We were in an unseasonable drought for that time of year. Usually in June, we get those wet thunderstorms and moisture to the point where the humidity is so high, you could cut it like a knife. That's what Hagan had described it as, but it was terribly dry that particular summer in 2011, I believe it was. And so it just presented some terrible problems for the guys that were out there in the game lands trying to fight that fire. All right, so if there's any questions for Terry, go ahead and throw those into the chat. We'll answer everything towards the end, but I want to keep on going so that we can give our next presenter plenty of time to chat about what he's bringing to the table today. Today we do have David Greathouse with us on the call to share a bit about fire behavior and forecasting and modeling. His day-to-day role with the North Carolina Forest Service is the Assistant Camp Director for the Young Offenders Forest Conservation Program, which some of you may know that as the Bridge program based out of Morganton, North Carolina. David is also trained to be a fire behavior analyst on wildfires, which is a critical role for painting the picture of how the fire may react in certain situations, of which weather is really a driving force for it. David, go ahead.
All right, good morning, everybody. Like Terry said, my name is David Greathouse. I do moonlight in the evenings as a fire behavior analyst for the North Carolina Forest Service. And also, I work a little bit with the Northern Rockies in the summertime when the state can let me get out there. So let me real quick, I'll share my screen. Let's see, where's the screen share button again? There it is. All right, can everybody see my presentation? All right. All right. So what we're going to do is for the next little bit, we're just going to talk a little bit about what I do as a fire behavior forecaster or fire behavior analyst, and get into a little bit of fire behavior forecasting. So this is just it's really just an informational session on what I do and how we forecast fire behavior. With that said, Carrie alluded to earlier that my main purpose as a fire behavior analyst is firefighter safety, whether it be firefighter safety on a wildfire or firefighter safety on a prescribed fire. And how I accomplish that is I take the fuel, the weather, and the topography of the burn unit or the wildfire, and I try to figure out what that fire is going to do. All right, I try to forecast what that fire is going to do. And that's important for firefighters, because if firefighters work for prescribed burners, they need to have an understanding of what that fire is going to do so they can make strategic and tactical decisions on their wildfire prescribed burn. All right, so just like we got taught in school, you have three things. You need three things to start fire. You need heat, you need fuel, and you need oxygen. We all know if you take one of those three things away from that triangle, that fire is going to go out. Okay, so in wildfire, we typically try to take away the fuel. All right. But once we get that fire going, once that fire ignites and get established in a wildfire setting, then I have to look at what's called a fire behavior triangle. Okay, and those are the three things that's going to continue or allow that fire to continue to burn across the landscape. All right, first we look at topography. All right, that's just the way the land lays. Now on the eastern end of the state, Topography doesn't really play a role because it's pretty flat. All right. So with that, which way the wind blows is pretty much which way the fire is going to go. All right. And then I look at fuels. I want to look at the fuels, what kind of fuels out there and what the fuel conditions are. And we heard Terry talk a little bit about drought and all that stuff. And drought plays a big role on our fuel conditions because the less rain we got or the longer we have between rain periods, the drier those fuels are going to become. And the drier those fuels become, the more they're going to contribute to fire intensity and the controllability of that fire prescribed burn. And then lastly, we got weather. Okay. Now, of the three elements in that fire behavior triangle, weather is the most critical. Why? Because weather is constantly changing out there. We all know this. We all know this from the time we got up this morning to the time we got to our office or took the dogs outside till now. Weather is constantly changing. And when weather changes, that's going to drive fire behavior. You know, what I tell everybody in all my firefighters is, listen, small changes in weather can equal big changes in fire behavior. Is whether it could be good changes to help us or bad changes that's going to hurt us. All right. So once I get the fire behavior triangle going, I get all these things, I start looking at forecasting fire behavior. I'm going to look at the topography, I'm going to look at the fuel conditions, and then I'm going to look at the weather conditions. Now, when I forecast fire behavior, I'm looking at the critical elements that firefighters need. Firefighters want to know what the rate of spread is. They want to know how fast that fire is going to move across the landscape. All right, that's important in terms of controllability. Is it going to run across a landscape where we can't get in front of it? Is it going to, or it's going to create a lot of heat? Is it going to just kind of mosey across the landscape, that's what we want in terms of prescribed burning. We typically want it to mosey across the landscape or move at a slower or moderate rate of spread. Then we got to look at flame length, how high that flame is going to be. Okay, the higher that flame is going to be, the more controllability issues we're going to have. Or we're going to look at different types of fire. The higher the flame length is, okay, the more likely it can get into the crowns of the trees during a wildfire or even a prescribed fire. Now, in a wildfire, yeah, that's dangerous. Okay, that can cause crown fire, high rates of spread, and all that stuff. But in prescribed fire, that's also critical too, because most of the time when we're prescribed burning the understory of these units. We don't want fire to get into the treetops. It's going to destroy and kill the tree. And if you're in a pine stand where you're getting ready to log it out, or it's marketable timber, well, if you get fire into the crowns, it's no longer on. Hold on a minute. I just got a message from Miss Carrie. Let me find there it is. All right, can everybody see me now? Carrie, can you see me?
Yeah, we got you, David. Thank you.
All right, you're going to see all my hand gestures because I like to talk with my hands while I'm doing this. All right, so back to crown fire. So we want to know the potential, the firefighters want to know what the potential for crown fire is going to be. And the other thing we want to know is spotting potential. And what I mean by spotting is, are we going to have fires that are going to get generated from the main fire out ahead of the main fire? Those are called spot fires, especially if they get across our control lines. If the spotting gets across our control lines, then we're going to have issues. We want our fire to stay within the confines of our control lines on a prescribed fire. All right. On a wildfire, the more spotting we have, the farther that fire is going to move, the harder that fire is going to be to control. And then we also want to know the direction of maximum spread. And that's mainly for wildfire, especially if we got like we talked about earlier, if we got communities out ahead of this thing or, values at risk, we want to know if that fire is going to be moving towards those values at risk. And so we can come up with a plan to protect those values. And then we also want to know how far that fire is going to spread in a given time. All right. All right. So when I start predicting, I have different ways I can start using the fuel, the weather, and topography to start forecasting fire behavior. And what I do is I use different fire behavior forecast models. All right. Models are just computer simulations that I plug in all this information. I plug in all the Terry's weather information in. I plug in the fuel conditions in. I plug in the topography information in, and it gives me those elements that we just talked about. Now, there's a whole bunch of different models out there. There's Behave Plus, there's Flam Map, there's Farsight, there's Near Term, Short Term, FS Pro, which is Fire Spread Pro. There's Wildfire Analyst. There's all kinds, but we're going to stick with three of them. We're going to stick with Behave. We're going to talk about Behave. We're going to talk about Near Term, Short Term, and FS Pro. Now, Farsight and Flam Map are pretty much the same thing as Near Term and Short Term, and we'll talk about that. Okay, and the backup and the kind of piggyback what Terry talked about being an incident meteorologist. A fire behavior analyst and an incident meteorologist, such as me and Terry, we work very, very close on wildfires. Most of the time when we're in the same room, because his information, his weather information, is vital to my fire behavior forecasting information. So I love it when I have somebody like Terry in the same room with me working together, because I can just look over my shoulder and say, "Hey, Terry, what's this going to be?" Or if I have any questions about the forecast, I can say, "Hey, Terry, hey, elaborate a little bit about this for me." You know, if I don't have Terry in the same room with me, I definitely have Terry or other IMET's phone numbers in my phone, and they definitely get a lot of calls from me when I start doing this stuff. All right, so let's talk about the fire behavior forecast model real quick. The first one is Behave Plus. Okay, I use Behave Plus extensively. Behave Plus uses forecast weather. In forecast, what I mean by forecasted weather is I mean weather for the next 24 to 48 hours. All right, it gives me a lot of options. If you look on the left side of the screen, I can look at surface fire spread. I could look at crown fire. I can look at side, how big the fire is going to be after a given time. I can look at spotting distance. I use crown scorch and tree mortality a lot when I'm working with prescribed burn bosses in prescribed units. And then I can look at probability of ignition. And what probability of ignition is just what's the percentage of fire brands going to start a spot fire. Okay. On the right side of the screen, that's where I put in all my inputs. All right. The 1 hour fuel moistures and all that, I get those from Terry. Terry gives me the weather forecast, and then I turn his weather forecast and compute those fuel moistures and the fuel conditions. All that on the right side, I fill in. You notice it has fuel, weather, and topography in it. And then in the middle, those are the outputs I get. I can get surface rate of spread. And now, you know, if you look on the screen, it says 25.5 CH an hour. That's actually chains per hour. And that's a forestry term. One chain equals 66 feet. All right. Or I can change it. I can get feet per minute. But typically we work as fire behavior analysts as chains per hour. I can get surface flame length, and I can get the maximum of surface spread, like you said, and the fire spread distance from all that information. So that's a very handy basic run that I use. I use that a lot when I get on an incident and I'm just starting out, and I get all that information going from Terry and all the other fuels information, and I start with these runs first. That way that can give those firefighters out there an idea of what that fire is going to do. All right, the next one I use the near term or the Farsight, and Farsight is just a fire spread model. Okay, and near term is the same thing as Farsight. They're two different programs, but one near term, it's found in WFDSS, which is WFDSS, which means the Wildfire Decision Support System. All right, Farsight is the same thing. It's just a standalone program. Typically, I run it near term in WFDSS, and it's the decision support system. All right. Now, what I like about Farsight is that it'll model for fire potential spread using the forecasted weather. All right. With Farsight, I usually only go out about 72 hours because, you know, if you talk to Terry, after about 72 hours, confidence in the weather forecasting kind of drops off a little bit. So I like to use about 72 hours worth of weather. And if you look at the map on top, it'll give me the fire spread. So what I'll do is I'll put it in, I'll put all this information into the model, and then it gives me the burn period. So if you look on the screen, it says 1, 2, 3. Those are the burn periods. So that's what the model's saying it's going to spread. Those are the spread over the next 3 days. All right. And what I can do is I can set the burn period because, you know, during times of high relative humidity, low temperatures, you're not going to get a lot of movement in the fire. So what I do is I look at Terry's weather and I say, okay, this is probably where the fire is going to move the most during this period of relative humidity and temperature. So I'll plug that in. And like I said, those are the maps that'll produce. And those maps are really great for firefighters and planners because they can see where that fire is going to spread and how far that fire is going to spread. All right. So the next one I use short-term, or what we call flame map. It's just flame map is the is the name for it. Okay. Now, what I like about short-term or flame map is, first of all, it uses the current weather. However, it only looks at one wind speed. That's the drawback to using short-term or flame map. It only uses one wind speed. Whereas in near term or in far sight, it's going to use a gridded weather forecast. So it's going to take Terry's weather forecast and the wind speeds hour by hour and produce that map. Where this one, I just put in one wind speed and a couple burn periods, and it produces. But what I like about it are two things. Okay. First, if you look in the slide in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see those red lines in the spread probability. Okay, what we call those flow paths. Okay, and what we like about that in a fire behavior standpoint is we can see where that fire wants to go in the landscape. If you notice in the upper left-hand corner, it's wanting to follow those drainages or those draws. So that's telling me that even though I'm looking, I look at the fire spread probability, but mainly I'm looking at those flow paths. I want to see where that fire is wanting to move. That way, if there's any values at risk, or from a prescribed burn standpoint, when they're lighting off, where is that fire going to move, and where are we going to have to mitigate that fire spread in those prescribed fire or the prescribed burn? All right, or like during a wildfire, it can tell me where that fire is going to move. So if there's values at risk ahead of that fire, it'll tell us, okay, hey, that fire wants to move the drainage toward that community. We need to do something about that. The other thing I love about short-term or flame map is that if you look in the center, you see a Google Earth image and you see a bunch of arrows on it. Okay, that's a wind map. All right, so what it does, it produces a wind map where I can see where the winds want to move across the landscape and their wind speeds. Okay, the cooler arrows, the blues and the greens and the yellows, those are the lower wind speeds. The warmer colors, the oranges and the reds, those are higher wind speeds. So what that tells me is, okay, that's where we're getting our stronger winds or our lighter winds. All right. So if fire gets in those areas, I can tell, okay, fire is going to speed up in this area or it's going to slow down. I'll give you a really good example of where this map came in about. Is several years ago, I was on a fire in Oregon, and the fire made a really strong run across the landscape, but there was a cabin down there in the valley bottom that fire ran all over the landscape, but didn't run through that area where the cabin was and didn't burn the cabin. And it kind of stumped everybody. We were like, okay, that fire ripped across the landscape, but somehow that cabin did not burn up. What happened? What was special about that? So me and the incident meteorologist I met, we did a standalone wind map called Wind Ninja, and we put it across the landscape, and it showed exactly where the cabin was, and it showed the winds in the wind direction flowing away from the cabin at low wind speeds. So we were able to go back and look and say, hey, now we know why that cabin didn't burn down. The winds and the wind speeds were low enough and away from the cabin, and it kept fire away from that cabin. So that let us set a light bulb off on my head and said, hey, I need to start using this more often so we can look at different areas of the fire and values at risk. So that's short term. All right, so the last one I use is called FS Pro, or fire spread probability. Okay, now when firefighters see this map, it looks pretty ominous, because the first thing they look at is they say, oh my God, that's the way the fire is going to spread day by day or whatever. So they see it, and usually if it was a large map. It's a large spread area, and they're like, oh my God, that fire is going to burn the world down. And that's not what this map is about. Okay. What this map does is it models the potential fire spread over a set period using climatological weather data, not forecast weather data. So what it does is when I set this up, I set it up for, let's say, 1,000 fires burning across the landscape, okay, over a 7-day period, okay? And what the model does is it goes back and looks at climate data over that time frame, and it starts placing fires on top of each other, okay? Different fire perimeters on top of each other, okay? So what it does is after 1,000 fires are setting on top of each other, it comes out with what you see, okay? And what this is if you look at it, it looks like a target. In the middle of the target is red, okay? So what that's telling me, what that tells us is there's an 80 to 100% chance the fire is going to be within that perimeter in the set period of time, let's say 7 days, okay? All right, and then it works out from there, 60 to 70, 40 to 59, 20 to 39, 5 to 19, 0%. Okay, so those cooler colors, those pinks and those blues, those are what we call rare events. Okay, they typically don't happen. And what I like to use that for is that I give that to the agency personnel, those planners in wildfire, and say, okay, this is what climate is telling us the fire wants to do. Okay, and so they can go and they can make plans. They can do the management action points. They can do adjust their strategies and tactics and look at they especially can look at the values at risk inside that target. Okay, then now this probability is only really good for wildfire, because typically in a prescribed burn we have a boundary and we have a set boundary, and we're going to keep it within that boundary. Okay, so those are typically the models I use for predicting wildfire. Now, once we get those models going, it's, well, first of all, when I do those models, I got to think garbage in, garbage out. Okay, so when I start inputting weather data, or when I start putting fuels data and stuff in there, I got to be precise. I got to go with good, solid stuff, because if I don't use solid stuff, I'm not going to get a solid model out of it. Garbage in, garbage out. Okay, so I look at Terry, and that's where me and Terry come out, or another IMET come involved. I really got to get good weather information. I got to, the good weather information is going to equal out good fuels information for me. All right, and then that's gonna determine the inputs I put in. Again, if I don't get good inputs, I'm not going to get good outputs. And then lastly, you got to think too, all models are wrong. Okay, those models are not going to predict precisely what that fire is going to do. There's too many variables out there. Okay, but they're useful. Okay, they can give me an idea of what that fire is going to do. All right, now after that, after I look at these models, I have to go out and validate what it's actually doing. So now it's time for me to get off my butt and get out of the office and get out into the field and look at what that fire is doing. Okay, look at the actual rate of spread, look at what it's going on, get information from other firefighters on that line about what that fire is doing. Okay, and then what I can do with that information is I can take that information, take it back to the model and tweak it. Okay, use what I'm seeing to tweak the model even more. So it's not all about just, hey, let's spit these models out, give it to the firefighter, they're done with it. No, it's spit these models out, let's go validate these models, okay, and then come back and rerun the model. So running these models is an ongoing process for these firefighters, so I can get it down. Now, hopefully, by the time after a few days of modeling and going on, I can get it dialed in to where, hey, the model is pretty close to what's going on out there in the actual environment. And then that way I can dig out good, solid information. All right, that's all I really got on modeling. That's all I got, Miss Carrie.
All right,
any
awesome.
questions?
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate all the good information, and it sounds like there's a real partnership between Terry's position being an incident meteorologist and your position being a fire behavior analyst. Without one, you can't really produce the other, sort of, or one feeds into the other. So thank you both very much for the great information. We'll go ahead and look here soon for some questions in the chat. Let's see, it looks like we have one coming in. So if we can have Julian, if you don't mind sharing that one with us.
Absolutely. So that first question is for David. First of all, can anyone get access to these predictive programs? And if so, is there a cost associated with them? Or do you have to be an analyst? And then number two, are you the only fire weather analyst in North Carolina? Or are there other folks that we can collaborate with when planning a prescribed burn or responding to a wildfire?
Okay, as far as the models I've shown you, no, those models you really can't get from, they're not really open to the public. Behave is open to the public. That's a public domain site, but the other two, near term and short term, are within what we call WFDS, which is the Wildfire Decision Support System, and that is a U.S. Forest Service program. However, there are apps out there on the phones now you can get. I think one's called a Wildland Fire Toolkit it's basically a Behave on a phone. It can give you that information. Now, the one thing you got to caution too with Farsight and Flam app, or near term and short term, is there's a lot of training that you got to go in to get those programs, or to use those programs, because you just can't throw a bunch of stuff in there. You got to build landscape files, you got to do all kinds of stuff. But I think it's called the Wildland Fire Toolkit that has that basic Behave program that I was talking about. It's a little less sophisticated than what I showed you on the face. And then as far as wildland fire analysts, there's two of us in the state right now. We have John Cook, he works out of Manio, and then myself, we work out of the mountains. We do have a couple in the wings that want to become fire analysts that we're hoping that we can get going, but right now it's just myself and John Cook.
All right, awesome, good question. Thank you, Caleb. Any other questions from the group today for either David or Terry? I have a question for Terry. We always want to know what are we looking at? What's the outlook? What's the latest projection, at least for the summer months, possibly? Can you tell us anything about what we're looking for with the transition for the El Nino oscillation?
So yeah, if that neutral does develop, what I would be looking for would be a more typical summertime in the southeast. So more coverage of thunderstorms, more rainfall. Again, it's going to be spotty because it would be convective in nature. So it would be showers and thunderstorms versus like a wintertime rain that gets everybody. But certainly, if we do transition into that neutral phase, that's what I would expect to see. Temperatures would be pretty much normal for what we'd expect to see, again, late spring into summer. It's just going to be how quickly does that transition occur. Some of the modeling shows it happening quicker than others. And like I said, the caution is that last year, all of the models were showing it transition pretty quickly, and it never did. So as David alluded to with models, they're going to be wrong. You just got to be like, take it with a grain of salt and understand that, yeah, there's valuable information, but it's always kind of a wait and see thing as well. But I have a better feeling about it happening this year than I did last year because of the changes that they're seeing in the subsurface ocean temperatures. They're starting to warm, so that's a good sign that we will go to neutral. There is even potential that it goes to El Nino by the end of the summer. So, I mean, if that were to happen, that would be very interesting as far as we get into the fall and a winter time. So we'll see how all that shakes out.
Definitely. Yeah, that's something that we are going to follow for sure. It's one thing that we look at quite a bit with the Forest Service is sometimes if we're not fighting wildfires, we also have to look for that H word, hurricane too. We also respond to those as needed. So that's the flip side on the weather front for us. There is a couple questions coming in. Looks like Kelly W has a question. Are past models available to see? I work at Pilot Mountain State Park and would love to see the models that were products for the Grindstone fire in 2021.
Yeah, I don't think there was any modeling done on that fire. I think that was a type 3 incident. And typically a type 3 incident, we don't bring on a fire behavior analyst, or there was no request done for it. So I'll look into it. I'll have to look into that, but I'm pretty sure we didn't have a fire behavior analyst on that incident. And I know there was no request come through me on that. So that was, yeah, I don't think there was, but I'll look into that for you, Kelly.
Copy that, David. Thank you. All right. Any final questions for our weather gurus today? If not, I'll go ahead and finish out with our final screen, but I'm always interested in learning about our past experiences and what we call war stories in the Forest Service. Terry, would you like to share a particular weather event that you experienced with the wildfire in a past incident that you were on?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I have many, but the most recent one for me, the biggest one for me is probably going to be when the East Troublesome fire in Colorado made its huge run. It ran from, I think it ran 100,000 acres in like 18 hours or something. And we had several days of 50-mile-an-hour plus winds on that fire. That was in north central Colorado, on the west side of the Continental Divide. It actually spotted over the divide because it was being pushed by the wind so strong. But the craziest thing about that was we had a strong cold front coming in the day that the fire really made its push. And the forecast that I had out, it had a red flag warning and a winter storm warning for the same forecast period, just because of the winds and the dry air ahead of the cold front. And then we ended up getting 15 inches of snow, and temperatures were -15 with a wind chill of -30 on the backside of the cold front. So that was crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. You never really expect to experience conditions like that, but in the Midwest and out in the West, it's always a possibility. All right, folks. Well, if there are no other questions coming through in the chat, thank you so much for attending today. We do have our last slide up for you with the QR code. If you've not yet signed up for our subscription service through the Forest Service, we can send you updates via email or text. And on the second page of the sign up site, you can pick and choose which notifications you'd like to sign up for. If you recall, on the first day, we talked about the certified burner classes, and we actually have that for an option for our subscription service where you can click on that and be informed of when our next certified burner schedule is going to come out. Thank you so much for attending today. And for those of you that have signed up for tomorrow, we'll see you again at 10 a.m. for wildfire risk in North Carolina. Take care and have a great day.